Georgia can get away with taking your voting rights away because there's no affirmative right to vote in the United States. We need to fix that. Check this out. Leave your comments, ding the bell, share it with your friends, and subscribe to our channel. This week, Georgia has now passed, I don't believe the governor has signed them yet, but these two pieces of legislation that would end automatic voter registration in the state, would ban drop boxes for absentee ballots, would radically cut back mail-in voting, and there's an amazing piece to this, and would make illegal the whole souls to the polls thing on some Sundays. This is where African Americans are 10 times more likely to vote than white people on Sundays because going after church and all this kind of stuff. Oh, the Georgia legislature just outlawed that. And Georgia is not unique in this, by the way. There are over 200 pieces of legislation in 40 states to do this kind of thing, to make it harder to vote, to restrict voting. The governor of Iowa, Kim Reynolds, just signed a piece of legislation. I mean, now that's law. Taking in Iowa, it used to be there was 40 days of early voting, and then the Republicans a couple of years back cut that down to 29 days. Now they've cut it down to 20 days, and they're putting all kinds of additional restrictions on, as well as restricting mail-in voting. It's like, we need a right to vote. We need an absolute right to vote, and we don't have one in the United States. And that's why these states can get away with this kind of stuff. This is a legacy of slavery and misogyny at the very beginning. They didn't want to say all men have a right to vote because that would have included black men. They didn't want to say all people because that would have included women. And so there just was never a right to vote in our Constitution. It was always a privilege, and it was left up to the states. And look at what the red states are doing. You know, yeah, we're going to force, down in Georgia, we're going to force people to stand in line for literally 11 hours if they want to vote. Oh, and if somebody wants to bring you a bottle of water or a slice of pizza, they go to prison. That's also in this new legislation. Because we don't have a right to vote, we've had 30 million registered voters removed from the voting rolls since 2014. And so when people show up in red states and they're not on the voting rolls, they're given a provisional ballot, which is only counted if there's a lawsuit. Because we don't have a right to vote, back in the 60s, William Rehnquist was able to organize Operation Eagle Eye in Arizona, where he, a big bear of a guy, a lawyer, he and other white guys, sometimes uniformed white guys, they drew heavily from local sheriff's offices, would go to the polls, polling places around Phoenix that were largely black, Hispanic, or Native American, and loudly challenge their right to vote, scare people away. Because we don't have a right to vote, Florida's Republican governor, Ron DeSantis, was able to prevent almost 1 million Floridians from voting because they owed fines to the government. Haven't paid your parking tickets? You're in big trouble. Because we don't have a right to vote, Louis DeJoy could destroy the post office just in time for Election Day and not suffer any consequences. It wasn't against the law. Because we don't have a right to vote, back in 2000, Jeb Bush, governor of Florida, was able to get a felon list from Texas from his brother, Texas Governor George W. Bush, and use that felon list to compare with the voting list in Florida, knowing that African-American names are a much smaller name pool than white names, who, white people in America draw from all kinds of different language groups across Europe. The Cyrillic languages, the Russian and the Slavic languages, and Polish and Greek and Spanish and German and all that kind of stuff, whereas most African-American names in the United States tend to come from either they follow the names of American presidents, or they follow the names of English, Scotch, or Irish immigrants to the United States who were slaveholders back in the day. So, gee, if you take a list of Texas felons, about half of whom are black or Hispanic, if you take a list of Texas felons and compare it with a list of Florida voters, you're going to identify, and in this case, Jeb Bush did, 90,000 African Americans in Florida. They knocked them off the voting rolls so that George W. Bush could, quote, win Florida by 537 votes. Because we don't have a right to vote, Mike DeWine, the governor of Ohio, wanted to throw people off if they hadn't voted in the previous election. That went to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court said, fine, go ahead, no problem. Especially if they didn't mail back a postcard. Because we don't have a right to vote, Republicans in red states are pushing through legislation that says that, you know, if you don't get an ID that isn't one that you would normally use, you can't vote. I mean, this is how crazy it gets. David Sirota over at, Judd Legum over at popular.info laid out the whole thing with Georgia here. This is amazing. In the Atlanta Constitution, Journal-Constitution, they noted that Governor Sonny Perdue, this is back in 2005, April 23rd, 2005, 16 years ago, Governor Sonny Perdue, Republican, signed into law a bill that would allow people to vote absentee without an excuse and without ID. Political observers, I'm quoting the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, political observers say Republicans tend to benefit the most from absentee balloting. And for 15 years, that was true, notes Judd over at popular.info. Then in the 2020 presidential election, everything changed. Although white voters still made up a majority of male voters, reports the ACJ, their share of the vote-by-mail electorate dropped from 67% in 2016 to 54% in 2020. The black share, meanwhile, surged from 23 to 31%. Nearly a third of black voters cast their ballots by mail in 2020. Only 24% of white people. So, yesterday the Georgia Senate passed an end to no excuse absentee voting, 29-20 on a party line vote. Now, if you live in Georgia and you want to vote by mail, you must be in the military, you must be observing a religious holiday, you must be caring for some, and I don't know of any religious holidays on a Tuesday. You must be caring for someone with a disability, or you must be required to work, quote, for the protection of the health, life, or safety of the public during the entire time the polls are open. Also, you have to include your a photostat of your ID. Like, yeah, a lot of people have copy machines at home, right? Republicans back 16 years ago argued that that voting by mail was safer because it produced a paper trail. That literally was the argument that they used. Now they're saying, no, it's not safe anymore. Not safe. Black people are doing it.